I did something right. Okay. That way, if the sound gets messed up on one of these apps, I'm good to go. So, the what I'm noticing on Facebook, and I have the same problem in my. I have to keep my voice low because I'm in a community area. In my private practice, when I am doing language samples, I have 2 points, maybe more, but so let me not number them. But there are a couple of things that really are pain points for me, and I think they're pain points for other SLPs. And I know they are because I was recently reading Wilder and Redmon's publication. They published an article in that, what was it? Was an ASHA journal, LSHSS. How did I not remember that? Language, Speech, and Hearing Services in the Schools. So this was the most recent publication that I found that really stood out for me or to me about LSA because they were talking. It's another survey. I think that's one of the general tendencies. We have a lot of. We don't have that many surveys, but there are a few. I remember the main one is the one from Stacy Pavelko in 2016. But even though that was published in 2016. The data was from 2023. So it was from the 2012 to 2023. Oh, I'm lying. The, the data was from 2013. So it was from the 2012 to 2013 academic school year. So that data is still somewhat dated because that was 13 years ago. The next set of data that we had made available to us, I like this. The Pavelko study, I think a lot of people use it is because she had quite a large sample size. So, but in other studies, in this Wilder study discusses that. She discusses the Pavelko study and the Bowain and Brown study. She discusses Westerveld and Clayson in 2014. But that study, I think, was with Australians. And then she also discussed the 2 language sample studies published in the ASHA journals in the 90s, which were from Wilson et al. And from Kemp and Klee. So basically, in these studies, the overall percentage of SLPs was very high in the 90s and then had a significant dip in the Pavelko study. But remember, the Pavelko study had the largest sample size, so like 1,300 SLPs, whereas the other studies only had like 200 SLPs, and the Bowain and Brown study had 90. So, and again, Westerville, even though they only had 200, they were not in the U.S. But I think it's important to consider the global practices, especially because we're in a global economy in a digital age where you can post, and I was posting in a group for SLPs in another city I'm not even in, right? But I may frequent the city and I may pursue licensure in the city. And so likewise, I'm in communication with speech language pathologists in other countries. So yeah, it's just something to consider, that we're no longer bound by geographical constraints and local practices, and extending our network, I think, is only beneficial for us. So considering what other SLPs are doing in other countries could really help to give us some new insight about ways that we want to practice. So in this study by Wilder, they got, how many? I just wrote it down because I was really like digging through this stuff because it's hard to kind of read it all. So they had 337 respondents, and of the respondents that they had, only 203 reported using LSA, so that's 60%. So their numbers were somewhat consistent with Pavelko's, which are lower, because again, most of the previous studies were saying, 90% of SLPs are using language sample analysis of some sort. But this study, which is the most recent, is saying no, actually, only a few of them are using LSA. Another interesting fact from this study is that, let me see, let me go back. She said, or they said, 125 or 61% reported recording language samples for later transcription, while 30% reported using live transcription. I thought that was interesting. Also, only one person reported using text-to-speech. Now, here it says one person uses text-to-speech, but then later it said 2 people use text-to-speech. So I'm not sure which of these data are consistent in this publication. Either way, that's still extremely low in terms of the people who use text to speech. That is surprising. So ASR, I think, has really come a long way, but there are many drawbacks to it. So I'm going to discuss that and some of the techniques that I use in my class in the class tomorrow. So what else? Most SLPs rated their skill level with using LSA as being intermediate, and I think that's interesting because how you, I mean, I guess intermediate is like, rate yourself. Um, 1 to 3, they're going to pick 3. Like they're just going to land in the middle. I don't know. Maybe it's just me, but I don't think much thought was probably put into I suspect that much thought was not put into those reports. What is intermediate? I don't know how they, actually, I do have the questions that she used in this study. So let's see what they defined as intermediate, because it depends on the context and the boundaries that they set for those definitions. So, okay, this person says, for in this survey by Wilder and Redmon, they said, how would you rate your skill level for analyzing a language sample? A, novice, meaning minimal knowledge, no experience. B, basic knowledge, meaning limited experience. C, intermediate, which they say is working or functional proficiency. And then D, advanced, which is in-depth proficiency. And E, expert, which is extensive experience. So intermediate was right in the middle. So again, I think that's why most people selected intermediate, not because they probably, I mean, I guess the definition, working or functional proficiency. I don't know why I keep saying functionally, but yeah, I doubt that. So, why do I say that? Because I do research on language samples and I speak to SLPs a lot. I'm not just doing this class because, I mean, I'm known for billing and coding, but my jam is language samples. That's my publication area. That's my research area. I don't have any publications on billing and coding, although I should. Um, I should have some publications on billing and coding. I don't have many. I publish in language. And particularly my recent publications have been in LSA, and I need to publish more. But, life be life. So, yeah. Otherwise, I think this is a really strong survey, and the data are pretty consistent with what is out there, especially with the new research, like from the Pavelko study, which I think is probably our go-to study right now on LSA. This could be the next go-to study, only because it's more recent, but the population was a small sample size, even though, their regression analysis, I mean, their power analysis suggested that they only really needed like 250 participants, and they got 337, but 203 only used language samples. So I still I still don't know if it's necessarily an adequate reflection of our clinical practice. I mean, 200,000 SLPs are certified by ASHA. So to get 203 is 1% of the population. So, it's still a good effort and it's very insightful. But I don't think we can make too many generalizations just because we have statistical significance in some areas. So, what do I mean by that? Well, one of the sections in the study talked about previous training. And in the study, she mentioned that most respondents reported receiving previous training for language sample analysis, or LSA, and actually 85%. So that's most, right? And then they also looked at previous training, and they did like different types of analyses, like what's it called, a binary regression, to see if there was a binary logistic regression. They wanted to see if there was a relationship um, regarding the predictors of ability. So they looked at SLPs who reported a skill level of 3 or higher, and they found that they had increased odds in using LSA. And they also found that SLPs who reported using a skill of 1 or 2, so those would be the novice or the beginners on the Likert scale. And remember, it was a 5-point Likert scale: novice, beginner, intermediate. What was the other one? Novice. In is number 3 on here: novice, beginner, intermediate, advanced, and expert. So of those, yeah, that was a Likert scale because it's uneven. And like I said, 3 is exactly in the middle. But anyways, they said those who reported being intermediate did have a statistically significant um, increased likelihood, I guess, yeah, increased odds of using LSA, whereas those who were novice reported not using it. So another thing to consider is sample characteristics. So they said that most SLPs reported analyzing 2 to 10 samples a year. So that's not a lot. Again, I'm an SLP and I have a clinical practice. So, and I'm not full time, and I definitely do more than 10 language samples a year. However, maybe it could be that because I'm in a private practice, um, I can spend more time on LSA, right? Even though I really shouldn't, because I need to move quickly in private practice. Otherwise, my billable hour time significantly reduces. So if I spend too much time doing a language sample and I'm getting a certain amount of money, let's just go here for like rates. Like, say I'm doing given insurance companies reimbursing for 92523 $150, and I do a language sample and it takes me 3 hours. Well, I just significantly reduce my income. So for me, I don't want to spend 6 hours, which I have done, or 3 hours even analyzing a language sample. I want to keep it at an hour. Because I also, have to collect the sample, have to prepare for the session, so that's another reason why it's important to get your billing codes right, so that you can be paid for the time spent doing comprehensive language assessment activities that are unbundled when we bill insurance. And I think a lot of SLPs think our services are bundled, and so they do too much under one code and they don't get enough money. Another way around that is to not accept insurance, right, and to do private pay and to have your established rates with your families, but it's likely that they can't really afford your services because you're not a tutor. And it's very easy for us to fall into that tutor category. And I think that also comes with like a lack of ability to describe clinically the relevance and significance of what we're doing. So it plays both ways. Hi. um, so yeah. So other things that I do in my language samples. Like, let me hop out of this study because I found it helpful, but I also did. Let me go back. There were some things in the study I did not like. Let me just say that. And I don't want to be rude again because I think this was overall good. And I critique my own work, so it's not personal. Um, what was it that I did not like? I got to pull it back up. Okay, well, I don't have my notes up, but there was a section under limitations, and was it the limitations? No, it was the LSA measures. It was in the results. SLP use of LSA. Their results showed that 61.6% of SLPs who used LSA in the past year recorded their samples and said that. They also found that, oh, this is it. Same thing, 61.6% of SLPs using LSA reported using a self-designed protocol, suggesting that self-designed protocol use may have increased since the work of Pavelko et al. In 2016, whose results showed that 45% of SLPs use self-designed protocols. So in 2016, remember, Pavelko study was really from the 2012-2013 school year. So 45% of SLPs were using self-designed protocols. In this study, 61.6% of SLPs were using self-designed protocols. Again, it could have been how the question was asked. I'm not sure. I'm not about to even go back and look for the question, but the response kind of bothered me because it said, this possible trend in practice is troubling as the use of self-designed LSA protocols is not evidence-based, and SLPs using these self-designed protocols have no way of verifying the reliability and validity of their measures. I do agree with that, but to a certain extent. Here's why. There are many standardized measures that don't work. So while we have standardized measures available to us that we could be utilizing, for example, and this is, I'm not coming at DSS. I think DSS is wonderful and many SLPs use it. That's developmental sentence scoring. Um, or whether you go through the whole protocol of like using what is recommended in Kitty Val, which is in Clan, right? Or you that's like associated with TalkBank, or if you're using Sugar, I don't know why you would be using sugar for Black people, but maybe you're not working with Black people. So um, I wouldn't use any MOU for anyone brown, especially African Americans. Uh, but if you're using, and I think even DSS, I would not use for diverse people, to be honest with you. I would stay away from it unless you use I think, I want to say Brandy Newkirk Turner, but I'm not sure if it was her. But in someone's dissertation I read, they did, it might have been Dr. Hyder. I'm not sure, but they did a analysis of DSS, and they modified it for African American English. And so they called it Black DSS. And I think that has some strength to it in terms of reliability and validity. But I would not be using these standardized measures on non-standard people, and even with mainstream English speakers. Okay, this is the research that I've done with my mentor, who's studied a lot of language samples with a lot of people. She has probably over 200 publications. I counted at least 100. Okay, she even says that mainstream speakers of Caucasian backgrounds don't always speak mainstream English. So we need to be careful with how we're using our measures to make interpretations about language ability. And that is why I somewhat disagree with the findings that I think Wilder and Redmon have published, because I don't think that it's bad to come up with your own tool for analyzing language samples. I do think it could be bad if you're not consistent. I do think it could be bad if someone can't replicate your findings, because that's how you lose or compromise your validity and your reliability. You don't compromise validity and reliability by following the correct steps with the wrong population. Okay, it's already compromised because it's the wrong population. You compromise validity and reliability, right, by having inconsistent steps. But you also have to be with the right population, with the target group. And language is not that we continue to approach language like standardized testing, like psychology testing, like mental constructs, and it's just not like that. Language is heavily influenced by culture. So is thinking in psychology. That is heavily influenced by culture as well. But language and culture cannot be, I believe, extracted from each other. Even every system of language has a context that it exists in, and that's the culture. So you got to include culture when you're talking about language, or you're going to make a mistake. And so language sample analysis is supposed to be flexible. So penalizing SLPs for using their own protocol, uh, I don't know if I would necessarily encourage that. I think a lot of SLPs lie about how much they use language sample analysis. I think they over um, estimate how much they analyze language samples, because once they start it, the time that they spend doing it is be burdensome. I think only the ones who were trained in graduate school or have participated in extensive training actually utilize language sample analysis, or LSA, continuously in their work, because it can be quite a challenge to draw meaningful conclusions from if you aren't familiar with that approach to clinical thinking. So, yeah, yeah. I don't know what to say about that. If you have a question, I can answer it. Otherwise, I'm gonna hop off soon. But let me see if there's any questions on this one. If not, I did have some questions already that were. Let me see. I always get language sample questions. I just, I've been focusing on billing and coding, billing and coding. I need to focus on language samples. So again, another person said, okay, has anyone used AI for analysis of language sample, for an analysis of a language sample for stuttering? And this is in the school-based SLP group. And I was like, absolutely. So some people said like they wouldn't trust it, never thought of it. Why would that be something to consider? Like, yes, it's not very good. I kept having to correct the AI. Why would you not want to use AI to analyze stuttering? What? Like, I would, of course, use AI to analyze stuttering. That, like, duh. Like, people are so against AI. I don't understand it. I'm so for AI. Why? Because AI is not going anywhere. And if you resist the current changes in our practice, you will be washed away with the changes of the time, with the wave of the new transition. It doesn't mean everything you do has to be AI or you have to be an expert. I am not an expert in AI. I don't know how to code Python. I'm learning. I'm in a data science class, and I took one last year because I couldn't understand what was said to me. So I'm taking the same class again, but not a I'm not a full blown data scientist. So um, yeah, but I you can absolutely use AI to analyze stuttering and language samples. So what would you do? Okay, well the first step is you want to first know what you're using. You have to know what type of AI you're using. If you're using ChatGPT, it has certain limitations to it. Likewise, if you're using Claude AI, for example, it has other limitations that Chat might not have. Like you can build a database with Claude. You can't build no database with Chat. You can you can build a database with Chat, but you're not gonna be able to manage it in Chat, to my knowledge. Okay, you're just gonna be able to use the data. So you'd have to keep putting it in unless you like clear out your memory and have enough memory in Chat to really hold a database, which it can hold a lot, but I don't think Chat is really at the point yet where it can sustain a corpus or corpora of language samples beyond 10. So I don't know about really building a database that you then can draw from. Salt is really good for that, but Salt doesn't have AI. Salt, y'all might want to get some AI. Um, Even, Grammarly has AI now, even though that's, more mainstream. Assault is more clinical, so I could see why they might not be at the AI phase yet. But I think if Saul had AI, they'd be onto something. Why? Because it's already got the setup for building a database. Now you have to have a researcher subscription in Salt, I believe, to build a database. I don't believe the clinician account allows you to build a database, but if you can, this is a game changer because if you can build a database, you can compare your own, local demographics when you're running samples. So back to the stuttering question. I have absolutely used AI to analyze stuttering. I have used AI with several of my clients, several people who had any type of fluency issue, whether or not it was stuttering. So, for example, public speaking, they might have frequent interjections. You know, like, right? Right? Those are interjections. So one way is to analyze the transcript and to look for interjections. And you can train your AI. You can tell it what an interjection is, even though it'll know if it's smart. It'll already know what an interjection is. And it'll look for it. It'll give you a percentage. So it'll give you a disfluency index relative to interjections. You could do the same thing for other types of disfluencies. You can get a disfluency index for repetitions. You can get a disfluency index for hesitations, for pauses. You have to transcribe it to detect those, but it can do it. Or it will need some sense of the time spent on an utterance. So you would need to make sure your utterance is time stamped, and then it can look at the time and potentially determine where disfluencies may exist in terms of hesitations and pauses, because those are a little more difficult to measure if they're not transcribed well. But again, repetitions generally